Food and Beverage Magazine Live, bringing food and beverage to life. With your hosts, James Beard Award winner Jennifer English and Food and Beverage Magazine publisher Michael Politz. Featuring leaders in the hospitality, branded food and beverage, and CPG industries, many of whom are Jennifer and Michael's friends in the business. For an informal and informative conversation where friends in the business share the latest intel, ideas, and best practices. Live, juicy inside scoop from the tastemakers, newsmakers, bread bakers, drink shakers, spoon lickers, clam diggers, farms, foodies, and friends of the Food and Beverage Magazine World. Here are your hosts, Jennifer English and Michael Politz.
Well, here's to us and those that wish they were us.
Hi, did you miss me?
I missed you.
I popped on late. Did you notice? I did that on purpose to make you worry. I wanted you to worry. I wanted you to think, is Michael not coming today?
No, I knew you were there.
Okay,
I could feel your aura.
Oh, you could? The presence of me?
I have my Sally Jesse Raphael glasses on today because you know we're going to get digging deep into the good stuff. We've got.
Oh, I thought you were Sally Jesse Raphael today.
Yes, I am. I'm channeling her.
She's not dead. Go ahead.
I know, but still bringing her here. Listen, I want to propose a toast. I come, as many people do, from a long line of glamorous women who, in the golden age of cocktails, had traditions, and they developed their signature drink and their signature toasts. And I had one grandmother, my paternal grandmother, who, when we went out to a luncheon, and she would have her standard cocktail, which was Canadian Club and water. And she would order that. And then instead of ordering a second drink, she would merely say, "You may compliment the bartender." And that was her sort of signature secret way of ordering a second drink.
You're so wealthy.
My other grandmother, when she wanted to order, she would say, "Well, you can't fly on one wing. I'll have another." So these are wonderful traditions that grew of a time when public houses, bars, restaurants, and clubs would have their signature drinks for their patrons. And everyone had their call. You would call a certain beverage that you liked. If you had a certain whiskey, I'll have the Johnny Walker, or I'll have the Glenlivet, or I'll have something. In Texas, and I didn't know this, there were dry counties, and whiskey had such a really integral part of Texas culture. And the reason we're talking about it is because we're going to take you to the newest, most fabulous Texas distillery making ordinary Texas whiskey. And we're going to look at a new Texas whiskey tradition that goes with barbecue and tomato salad. It's good with a lot of different things. But
so I love your story. Before you get there, let me tell you my story. When I'm in a bar and I'm on a date and the girl said, "I have to go use the washroom." And then I say, "Well, give them my name. You'll get a better seat."
Oh,
funny. Okay, go ahead.
It's funny. Anyway, the long story short is we've reached out to our friends in the Texas culinary world, including James Beard Award winner Linda West Eckhart, who wrote the Only Texas Cookbook. And I asked her for some tips about pairing great Texas whiskeys and food, because we're coming into grilling season. And the show today is all about grilling and outdoor cooking and the kinds of food that we're getting ready to enjoy in the month of June as we're getting warmer weather. All of us are clearly itching to get outside, but we're not necessarily itching to go to restaurants. So how can we bring that classic steakhouse experience, that true Texas charm and hospitality, that wonderful Lone Star State conviviality to life? Well, we went right to the source. And we've got Rob Arnold here. He's one of the founders and owners of TX Whiskey. They're a new whiskey that's being produced in Texas. He's calling in from the distillery in Fort Worth. There, you've got one too. And we're actually
I've got three. By the way, I've got three. I don't know why. They're all
because
different.
they make three different expressions of this. And we're going to Yes, we're sniffing. You're going to sniff. I'm going to sniff and taste. Rob's going to teach. And we're going to do an authentic Texas whiskey tasting. And you may say, well, I know I like whiskeys from Kentucky. I know I like whiskeys from Scotland, Ireland. I even love whiskeys from Japan. What am I going to learn about Texas whiskeys that's going to make me love them in their own category? Well, Rob Arnold's the man who's going to teach us just that, so that when we get our skirt steaks and bone-in T-bones ready for grilling over the next few weekends, we will have a perfect pairing.
But wait, who's coming on to talk about that? Is that what Matt Moore is doing?
Matt is calling in the second part of the show. We have one of the great New York Times celebrated chefs from New York, Matt Moore, calling in to talk about grilling during quarantine. What do you do when you don't even have a fire escape or an outdoor space big enough for a hibachi? There is always a way when there is a will, and that is why we're going to raise our glass to this quarantine grilling and food pairing show that we're doing today. It's all about these wonderful sort of ready for the season kinds of flavors.
It's kind of a man show, but I'm thinking maybe you could sort of women it up a little bit, huh?
I mean, it's right up my alley. I'm just saying.
Okay. I'm just saying. You know.
I did. And just so you know, I grilled bone-in New York strips that have so incredibly much flavor. You know, yesterday we were joking about the fact that I look like my grandmother now. Yesterday,
I wasn't joking. I wasn't joking.
Yeah, I know. I was eating a steak that would have made my grandmother say, "Ooh, I like the little part. Can I have your bone? Can I have the bone?" Because she would nibble and she'd love the part near the bone. But I digress. Texas whiskey has a long and storied tradition. And in some of the dry counties, you had to wrap your whiskey in a brown paper bag and you would keep it by your leg of the table on the floor. It was not something that was prominently displayed on your table the way we can freely enjoy it today. The whiskey tradition is long in Texas. It is proud and it is thriving in the new expressions brought to life by Rob Arnold and his team. Can we bring him on?
He's kind of long-winded. Is that
Not
okay?
Me.
Okay. There he is.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Rob. Hi,
Thanks
Rob.
for coming.
Let's zoom in on Rob. There he is. Look at that, huh? That's a Texas boy. Just in case no one's ever seen a Texas boy, there you go.
But I'm from Kentucky, so
That's
I've been in Texas for about 10 years, though.
There you go, Jennifer. He's all yours.
To me, that's the best of both worlds.
There you go.
Hey, Rob, let's talk a little bit about American whiskey traditions, because when you endeavor in the whiskey business, you really do tie into a long history and tradition of brown spirit that has its roots in, one could argue, the spirit of this country.
Yeah, I mean, for me specifically, I'm third generation in the industry. So my uncle, my grandfather, my great uncles, they were all in the bourbon industry in Kentucky. Even goes back to my great grandfather, who was a brewmaster from Germany and came over to Indiana and brewed beer there for the majority of his life. But
oh, cool. What brand was that? I'm just curious.
It's no longer around. One thing I have that's cool though is a census record from 1900 that has his name on there, an occupation brewer.
That's so cool.
But it's I mean, look, the spirit in whiskey starts really with farmer distillers back at the very beginning of our country, right? I mean, the idea of a distillery as a standalone place, that's not the way it started. It was farmers who would distill surplus grain into whiskey. And from there, the industry grew, and the style of bourbon, and native to the United States, grew from our use of corn, which was a new grain to these distillers that came from Ireland and Scotland and Europe. They were familiar with barley, right? And maybe working with rye and wheat, but not corn. They discovered corn when they came to the New World. And so it's the whiskey is mixed into the history of farming from really the very beginning. And the industry grew, obviously, but we're still very much connected to the farm, just the same way the winery is a part of a vineyard,
One of the things that's important for us all to remember is that the immigrant traditions of peoples coming from other parts of the world brought with them all of their spirits distilling experience, which is how we ended up with something other than just a moonshine culture. Not that there's anything, it's just a very different kind of product, but those refined, barrel-aged, wonderfully flavored, really elegant spirits that come from the parts of the world that really brought those usquebas and whiskeys and water of life to life that got brought here. We think of it as traditionally American, but again, it has its roots in that wonderful immigrant experience. And it's just part of that liquid pastiche that has become this part of our culture. Talk a little bit about your family and where whiskey has brought you all and your whiskey story, your family whiskey story.
Well, before you do that, Jennifer, can you use normal words that everyone understands? I don't know what a pastiche is. There was like 5 words in that last rant that I had. Rob, were you with me on this, or I knew 1 or 2 of them, but not that one you just said. So I mean, what is a pastiche? I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm the Count of Monte Cristo right now, and I don't even know what to do with myself.
Sorry. I am so sorry.
I mean, I feel like John. I feel so fancy. I don't know what to do.
I did way too many crossword puzzles. That's all I can say. Mea culpa.
Oh my God! There she goes again. Do you do the New York Times? Do you do the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle?
In blood.
Are you familiar? Are you familiar with that? The New York Times. Are you familiar with the New York Times?
No, I get mine from the dollar store, and I get them in large print. I mean,
I just didn't know. I'm sorry, Rob. Where were we? Let's go, Rob. Wait, Rob, where were we? Let's go back to you. Where were we?
Talking about whiskey.
I'm sorry. Sometimes she gets carried away with herself.
But yeah, I mean, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. I grew up around the industry. It wasn't something I was dead set on doing, though. It really was after I left Kentucky. I came to Texas to study chemistry and medical research. And while I was in grad school, I started making beer at home. I started home brewing, and then I might have made some whiskey at home, or maybe I didn't. I'll never say for sure, but I realized there was this really cool ability to tap into the science that I was already studying, the science that I'm passionate about, with this artistic, creative process that is whiskey making. It's not science, it's not art, it's a mingling of the two for sure. And that's about the time I really started talking to my uncle and family friends that were in the industry there for their careers, and just I realized I had this wealth of resources and this family tie to this amazing spirit. And I realized there's just so many things lined up that I was going to pivot away from medical research and become a whiskey distiller. So when I told my parents for the first time, given that they were familiar with the industry and my mom's dad and brothers had worked in it, they weren't totally shocked. There probably wasn't the normal reaction when someone would tell their parents they're going to drop out of grad school and make whiskey. It was actually a pretty good reaction. But the one thing they were not on board with initially, they are now, was, why are you going to make whiskey in Texas? Why don't you come back to Kentucky and make whiskey? But I recognized, along with the original proprietors and founders of TX, that there was something special about the state, from the weather for maturation, the ingredients, the people here, the passion for whiskey. I decided to stay in Texas and make Texas whiskey versus go back to Kentucky and make Kentucky bourbon.
Talk a little bit about the TX brand. There are 3 expressions in front of us today. You're going to teach us how to be a proper whiskey taster. For any kind of whiskey, these kinds of standard sampling and testing techniques are pretty common. So no matter what you're tasting, you could have an entire summer tasting different whiskeys from all over the world. But we're going to learn them in Texas with an expert. And I want you to start by telling us about the 3 expressions we have in front of us here. And explain to me why we have these fantastic yet different hops. It reminds me of another kind of it's like a signature. It's like everyone's different.
Yeah. So the 3 expressions we have right now are TX blended whiskey. This was our first release. and then TX Bourbon and TX Bourbon Barrel Proof. The Barrel Proof actually just came out really last month. But each one on the cap uses a piece of boot leather. So reclaimed boot straps from local bootmakers around Fort Worth, around the state of Texas. And each one's a little bit different. And it could be anything from exotic, snakes.
I got a neat look at this one.
Yeah, the different colors. Each one.
I'd like to say mine came from a real rough cowboy. I can tell you that right now.
But when they make a pair of Western boots, we call them boot scraps. They're the leftover parts of the leather, and usually those can be used to make belts or wallets, or they're thrown away. We trade whiskey for those boot scraps and make all of our caps out of them. So each one really is handmade at the distillery. It's incredibly low throughput, but it's a thing that we'll never turn away from because it's a true mark of our brand.
Not vegan.
No comment. Yeah.
Rob, talk to me about the sniff that we're getting from the corks that we just are examining, and how important aroma is in your particular expressions of whiskey.
I mean, aroma in whiskey especially is much more important than taste. So if you have a glass, the first way to get that sense of the flavor is through sniffing. That sniffing process will allow so many of the flavors that you're going to experience when you take a sip to be captured just through putting your nose into the glass. You can, so I'm using a whiskey glass here called a Glencairn glass that comes from Scotland, but any type of glass will do. The one you have right there is great. A wide mouth at the top isn't ideal for whiskey. So like a tumbler makes great for cocktail. Maybe not the best if you're going to do a tasting. But really anything works, whatever you have at home. Swirling is a bit of a point of contention, but I think it's just fine to swirl, just give it a little bit of swirl. You can watch the legs on the glass, just like with wine. That'll tell you maybe how viscous it is, what kind of mouthfeel you might expect, how strong the alcohol is.
And how do the legs tell you that? Because as you look at the liquid dripping down the side once it's washed over, what am I looking at and what am I looking for? What does that tell me? Really, you're looking at the speed of those legs. How fast do they fall back down into the glass? Mm-hmm. It's not a mark of quality. It's not going to tell you if the whiskey's a good or a bad whiskey. But if you have legs that really hang up on the glass, don't fall down quick, you're probably going to experience a very, a nice mouthfeel, very viscous, potentially high alcohol. But if those legs are good, if the viscosity is good, the high alcohol content doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a hot whiskey. It can be a very, very savory and fun experience still. And we're tasting the first whiskey is the TX whiskey. And this came out in 2012. This was our first whiskey that we released. And in 2013, it won Best American Craft Whiskey in San Francisco at the World Spirits Competition.
Blah, blah, blah.
Definitely helped us kind of get our name on the map to an extent. But
I'll get your name on the map, young man. Don't you worry about it.
Yeah, we need to.
Come on, bro.
So you take a nice sniff.
What's really compelling about this for the audience that doesn't have a glass of this in front of them, although next week when we visit with the food piece of this and we're going to do a spirited dinner or a food and whiskey pairing just in time for Father's Day. But what I really loved about this were the notes of vanilla and caramel and almost a soft tropical fruit in the finish of the nose. It really is sniffing into the, super luscious vanilla caramel category. And it almost tiptoes into the nose of a rum. That's how remarkably.
Jennifer, when you say the finish, you don't mean from Finland, right?
No.
Okay. I like the fact that Rob is an overachiever. We haven't even discussed this yet, Jen. The Shots of Knowledge. Okay. That's his book. Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Where else? Book a Million.
Of whiskey.
Yeah, that's I worked on that with a professor from TCU, chemistry professor, Eric Simonik, and it came out a few years ago. It's a fun project. If you like science, if you like science and you like whiskey, it's a good book.
Super nice of you to include him. I would leave everybody out. Actually, on my book that's coming out July 1st, I don't tell you who I work on it with because I take all the credit. You know what I'm saying, Rob? I take all the credit. Thank you.
I like it.
But who is Firestone and Robertson? Who's Firestone and Robertson?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's the Firestone and Robertson distillery, and those two original proprietors were Leonard Firestone and Troy Robertson. I was the first employee of TX. I was still in grad school when I met Troy and Leonard, contemplating leaving to go into the industry. And so we kind of hooked up to the grapevine before the company had announced who they were. But had a few meetings. We just talked, drank whiskey. We had a lot of the same ideas for what a Texas whiskey could be, and especially one from Fort Worth. And so that's, they basically took me out of grad school before I finished to become a distiller. But
and where are they now? Where are these two men right now? Where's Troy and Lenny?
So they're still involved as our brand ambassadors. We about not quite a year now. The company was we partnered with Pernod Ricard, who is a large wine and spirits company.
I've never heard of Pernod Ricard. Are they a large company?
Stop! We're running out of time. We're taking time away from my whiskey.
Yeah.
Drink your whiskey. We're chit chat with Michael. Yeah. It's chit chat with Michael. Chit chat with Michael. While you talk about vanilla and finish vanilla.
It's been, just for what it's worth, it's been awesome. Some of these distillers that I have known somewhat at massive places, well-established places, Jameson, Hiram Walker, now they're a phone call away. So it's been pretty good. Some
of the other things in the portfolio include things like the Martell Blue Label, if I'm not mistaken, that we absolutely adore. So this is about the best of the best. And to get somebody like that saying, this is the best in this category means we've got to pay a lot of attention. We've got a shorter amount of time, and I apologize for that. But let's take our first sips.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about how the relationship between aroma and taste exists in a whiskey. I'll let you be my, whiskey doctor and tell me how that works.
Lead her down the road. Close your eyes, Jennifer. Grab her by the hand, doctor. Take her to the whiskey room.
Take your sip, but let it, leave it in the mouth for a little bit. Move it around. Don't just take a sip and down it.
Look at the face. I almost want to can I just get the face on Jennifer? Can we just get that face? Let's just go. Can you do that? Do the face again.
No.
Control room. All right, fine. Oh, we lost her. Now she's gone. All right, there she goes.
Rob, what's really compelling about this is that all those notes that we sniff and smell and first appreciate give way to a chord of flavor in the whiskey itself that is both textural in its viscosity and then in terms of the heat, which everyone expects from an alcoholic beverage, is usually a marker of how well modulated and controlled it becomes in the process. Talk a little bit about your house style of TX whiskey and how you control those elements.
TX, you mentioned it earlier. The punch that you get of that vanilla and that caramel off the nose, and then again, we take a sip. That is definitely the flagship house style for TX whiskey. Not for our bourbon so much, but for our TX whiskey. Yeah. And those, there's such approachable flavors, and they do mix really well in a variety of cocktails. Really, it's hard to find a cocktail TX whiskey won't work well in. But the process that we use to create this is blending, right? So this is a blended whiskey. And just like with blended wine, that basically just means there's different styles of whiskeys that are blended together to create the end product. And through blending different styles of whiskeys together, you can accentuate flavors that you want and then quiet down ones that you don't want. And so we could really accentuate the flavors of vanilla and caramel through the blending process.
So is that called a master whiskey blender? What would you call that job?
Yeah, my title is Master Distiller, and then we also have a head blender, Ali Ochoa, who is in charge of deciding how to mingle barrels for a batch, right?
Now, can you do it per bottle, or it's got to be a whole big blended batch?
It's per batch, yeah. So like,
I mean, it is, but because I was actually asked the other day to open a whiskey place in Vegas on the Strip, and we will do our own blending right there and have like a blender that people would come in and buy they would buy a full, we blend it for them.
That's
and
cool.
I was thinking, isn't that a cool idea, right? I was like, but is it a moneymaker? And it has to be a moneymaker for me. You know what I'm saying, Jen? That's all.
Well, and I'm thinking, what if the most miraculous combination is struck upon? But, you don't have to wonder, because we've got 3 great expressions. We're running out of time. And I have to tell you.
Why do you keep saying we're running out of time? Matt Moore can come on. He looks like a whiskey drinker to me.
Yeah,
Should we bring him on?
Well, in a minute. I just want to do 2 things first.
Don't be afraid of him.
No, you're gonna love all the guests we got booked today. You're gonna love today's show. So, Rob, I want to talk about 2 things. We did a lot of sampling of food pairings, and in this pandemic period, people are drinking a more, and sales are up, but people want to drink better. And one of the things I want to compliment you on is you have delivered both a sipping whiskey and a pairing whiskey, a whiskey that pairs really well with food, and not just on its own. One of the things people do right now is they do lower alcohol by volume. And I'm going to get to the heart of the potato here. When you make a tall drink like a highball, when you make a highball, like a whiskey and soda or a whiskey and water, and that becomes your quencher as you're eating food, you want it really irresistibly quenching and satisfying and companionable, pairable with food. The blended whiskey with all those notes is really very friendly at the end of the meal, especially. We did a series of desserts, including bananas Foster. We did a strawberry compote. We did some crunches, pies, and crumbles. And what we found was that whiskey soda at the end of the meal was really satisfying. And that blended whiskey worked brilliantly well with those dishes. But it was the bourbon in its tall highball expressions, making a low, that was very entree companionable. And I want to get to it. Yeah. And I want to get to the fact that things like ribs with a great, sweet sticky sauce, and we did bone-in steaks, and we did great tomato and watermelon salads. And again, that tall sipper that we created with the bourbon, the TX bourbon, was really sensational, and that's what makes it really ultra grilling friendly for this time of year. Yeah, it really is. I mean, so TX bourbon, this was our second whiskey that came out in 2016. It's it brings, and for bourbon, I think, pretty unique flavors of strong sweet spice, cinnamon. It's got nice dark fruit flavors, fig, raisin, and the flavors when you mix them with, and barbecue's obviously huge down here in Texas, and it does really pair well nicely with barbecue, with grilling, and. I think you nailed it with the highball is a great way to enjoy your, any whiskey, bourbon whiskey, blended whiskey, whatever, with a meal. I mean, I love whiskey, obviously, but, I usually won't go reach for a neat whiskey when I'm having a meal. That's something I have after. But a highball, we love like Topo Chico down here in Texas, Topo Chico and bourbon, Topo Chico in the blend. It works really good. It's right here. Yeah. Before we bring Matt in, let's just bring in a sniff of the bourbon, and talk a little bit about how notably different this is. Yeah. Smelling the blended whiskey was like smelling a perfume. Smelling the bourbon whiskey, the TX bourbon, is like sniffing a great cologne. It has so much more masculinity to it. It's just, I mean, I can say this as a lady who's been very fortunate. This is like dancing in a proper ballroom style with a gentleman who wears just the right amount of the best cologne ever. You don't want the dance to end. It just smells amazing.
Yeah, and
that's what happens to me, Jennifer, with my colognes. You know, my wife has been buying me very fancy colognes, and it's true. It's called Creed, very high end, very expensive.
That is very high end.
It's the oldest cologne in the world. I don't even know if they have it in Texas, so don't worry about that, Rob.
Of course they do. It's when even Marcus, God rest his soul.
Oh, right. That's true.
Prince Harry wears the Creed.
Oh, he does?
But if he was smart, he wears the next bourbon, just a little here. Do you wear the bourbon behind your ear, Rob?
Yeah, sure. We're great. We had candles made out of the aroma of the bourbon and the blend, actually.
What? We got to get those. Let's ask for our care. I got to get a care package banner made because we need a care.
But I mean, the bourbon compared to Kentucky bourbon, it is distinct. I mean, part of that, a big part of that is where the environment down here, the weather. So, I mean, it gets hot in Kentucky too, but it gets very hot here, and it doesn't get that cold in the winter, especially compared to what Kentucky gets.
Well, it's more humid there too, Rob. It's more. And have you dated Kentucky women before? Have you dated Kentucky girls and then dated Texan girls? Have you? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, well, my wife's a Texas girl, so.
Well, I was once with a Kentucky girl.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you that. She
You
was
what?
adorable, and yes, she was. Knew how to cook. I'll tell you that. Hi, Jen.
But
we're going to bring Chef Matt Moore on, who was recently featured in the New York Times. He's going to be grilling with us today. And the reason, Rob, we're doing that is because this whole bundle of yummy, delicious, remarkable. Oh, there he is. Look at that. Is that an egg? Oh,
it's a cast iron egg. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome. Hey, Matt.
Hey, how are you guys?
You've got tips for getting us through. Are you a whiskey drinker? Is it okay that we're bringing you on a little bit into this conversation and overlapping?
Yeah, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, so I think it runs in our blood. And Rob, please don't hold it against me. During this quarantine, my wife told me that I've been drinking too much whiskey. So she actually set me up with kind of a watered down White Claw out here to have a little happy hour. So I'll have to break into the whiskey. So don't think less of me as a Tennessean. I know that we don't have quite the same things that they have in Kentucky and certainly in Texas. We all know that Texas is the only state in the entire union. So I appreciate it.
I'm a Tennessee ball, so I've got nothing against Tennessee.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Jennifer, why didn't you tell me we have a boy from Nashville coming on? I would have had my country star friends pop in.
Because we'd run out of time and we have a lot to talk to them about.
Matt, do you know the great Arlie Bragg? Are you familiar with Arlie Bragg, the great barbecue guy?
I am, yeah.
He's a good friend. I love Arlie Bragg. He runs, what does he run? Kansas City Barbecue, the K. He runs that whole thing. And he does all that.
Believe it or not, we're still a small town for the right people, and it's been a great place. I've been here for 15 years, so it's kind of home away from home. I grew up outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and went to school at Athens, Georgia. Sorry, Rob, I'm a Georgia guy, so the whole Vols and Tennessee thing is a little bit of a conflict. Yeah, but it's
Athens is probably my favorite place in the SEC. So,
are you in Nashville proper, or are you out sort of by Franklin and Leaper's Fork and that stuff?
No, I don't go out to Bourbon, and I'm in East Nashville. So, in fact, what you're looking at was completely destroyed 2 months ago from the tornado that hit us on March 2nd. So
that's why the fence looks so new.
Well, it's AstroTurf actually. So I have two young girls, and the fence. Yeah, the fence. I'm sorry, but yeah, it was. We live about a mile from downtown, and East Nashville, sort of like the Brooklyn of town or the Silver Lake of LA, and just a really great artist community of people. And as we were rebuilding this particular part, if you were to go literally 25 yards this way, it's a complete war zone. Homes were completely wiped out. The 750-pound cast iron grill behind me actually survived in the backyard, but everything else was taken out. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's been certainly an interesting season for us here.
Well, we're going to have to introduce Matt to one of my best friends. Actually, he lives in Nashville, right around you somewhere. And his birthday happens to be today. And his name is Phil Vassar. If you know Phil Vassar.
Oh, Okay, so Phil and I, 15 years ago, I used to play music, and I probably opened 15 or 20 shows for Phil.
Wow.
Southeast runs, yeah. So my buddy, who's an agent at William Morris Agency, Henry Glasscock, used to be an independent promoter, and did a lot of shows with Phil. He's fantastic, man. He's seriously, like, I don't think there's songwriters like him anymore, honestly.
Oh, no way. No. And he's 104 years old today. That's the best part about him. Jennifer.
Stand on the piano, man. He's awesome.
I'm going to raise
Jennifer,
my glass.
You would love Phil, Jennifer. He's all buff. He's buff and banging on that piano.
He's like doing push-ups on the piano, man.
Right,
He's awesome.
exactly.
He's great. And, in fact, Rob, we drank a ton of bourbon together one night in Tuscaloosa. I forget the club that we played, but he's a good guy, man. I love his music.
So I'll connect you guys back up because I know he loves that, you know?
Yeah, that'd be fun.
That kind of camaraderie, that conviviality, Jennifer. All right. Now I'll do the interview with Matt. I've got that done. He doesn't want to go out to the suburbs. I'm done. That's my only in-town. Although I got a guy that owns a couple restaurants. One's called Cinema, which I heard is amazing down there.
Great place.
Yeah, so there you go, Jen. See? And by the way, Jennifer, Q Taylor, who owns Cinema, guess who he worked under? My bestest friend in the whole wide world who passed away. The young Carrie Simon. Yep. Q ran Simon's. And then he moved to Nashville, opened Cinema, and I think like 8th Street Coffee or something. But he's done a great job. Great job. I'll have to send Matt in.
Rob, if you're going to hang out, but I do have to mention, I know we're here to talk maybe about a cookbook or grilling or something like that. You guys are talking about fragrance. So my other business is actually in the south of France. So we own a fragrance company based in Austin, Texas. And our most famous fragrance, you got to stop wearing Creed. You got to start wearing Moonshine Cologne. It's been the most popular men's fragrance for 10 plus years. We sell it at Stag in Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, Texas, kind of all over the country. Jennifer, you've been throwing out a lot of je pense que tu parles français, no?
You know what? I have to tell you, I am so excited that you're here. We're going to round out this conversation. And I actually wear men's cologne. So I can't wait to put the dab of moonshine behind me as well. That sounds amazing. But, you know, it's really not surprising because 85% of what we experience as flavor when we talk about either a spirit or a food comes from our sense of smell. All of us in this business have a developed sense of aroma. It's not only one of the most primal things that triggers those sections of our brain that connect emotion and food and experience, but it's also something that connects us as human beings, and it gives us so much pleasure. And the more pleasure we have, the more satisfaction we have from the things we eat and drink. And so it's no surprise to me that you're telling me that you're in the aroma business on multiple fronts.
Yeah, I mean, out of all the five senses, our strongest sense of recall is the olfactory sense. You know, and I can always think of just memories of my youth. You know, my grandmother frying chicken in cast iron, playing baseball growing up, and the smell of fresh cut grass. You were talking about Kentucky women. I won't go there for you, but regardless, you know, I think it is one of those things that kind of leaves that stamp in place in time. And, you know, writing cookbooks and writing recipes is really an homage to a process, right? Like you're creating the heart note. Like you've got a base with your core ingredients. You've got the middle notes. You got your top notes with like finishing sauces, and you still have that same mantra when it comes to a fragrance. So for me, as a cookbook author and also being involved in the world of perfumery, they're very common themes. You're just using different senses to really appreciate those, but they're also very much complementary. And I have a young, a 5-year-old. She just turned 5 last week, and she's been turned on to the whole COVID happy hour that my wife and I have been taking advantage of. Around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, we get a nice glass of rosé. And one day she told me to pick up tortilla chips at the grocery store. But being a Southerner, I didn't see any tortilla chips. I bought some pork rinds, and my kids started calling them puffy chips, not pork.
Nice.
And I'll never forget, my daughter said they taste like gasoline. And really what she was doing is taking that, like, the taste of a pork rind is like the smell of diesel gas. And I was like, well, goodness, you're going to be a nose one day. So it's unique to see it from the perspective of a child.
That's awesome. Hey, Rob was telling us about his bourbon whiskey, and we were sniffing it together. And the sniff of that was so distinctively different. And what you just did, Matt, was you described one of my favorite food terms, which is a flavor chord. Flavor chords are those things that are really just so self-evident that when you start to pay attention in the moment that you're experiencing it, breaking it down to the component parts, you just explained on one hand what those parts are. I'm going to turn now to Rob, my scientist. Rob, describe flavor chords as we're experiencing them, because they really do deliver an understanding of multiple things happening at the same time when we're taking it in through the aroma.
Yeah, so like with whiskey especially, olfaction is more important than what you get through taste. And the retronasal, when you have the whiskey in your mouth and the aromas are going back up into your nose, that really creates that impression. And with whiskey, there are layers to it for sure. And you can train and you can begin to tease those flavors apart just the way you can with food and with wine and anything else. But I like to always start when I'm tasting a whiskey. I don't try to do that. I take a sip and I enjoy it and let the experience and let the flavor, the overall flavor of that whiskey just make its mark. And then from there, if I want to dive into it more and try to tease apart the individual components that are creating that overall flavor impression,
right,
I will. But there's a lot of times where I don't want to do that, where I'm just trying to enjoy the whiskey. Now, like today, when we're with our sensory panel, and the whole goal there is to do just that, to kind of tease apart the whiskey into its individual components. The cinnamon, the oak, the vanilla, caramel, the fruits, so the tropical fruit, dark fruit, citrus fruit, and you can find a lot of those things in whiskeys. But you also just have that overall impression that I think that's the most fun part about it, right? And then the way you connect that to your memories and experiences, sharing it with friends and family.
Matt, if you haven't had a chance to try the TX bourbon whiskey that Rob and his team make,
yeah,
he's done one of the most difficult things there is to do. Take something that we know and love, which is bourbon whiskey.
Sure.
And, most places around the world that produce bourbon whiskey actually come from somewhere near where you all are from. But the truth is, people are producing bourbon, quote unquote, whiskeys all over. There's problems with labeling. We won't get into that. But one of the things that's very difficult to do is to develop the terroir, or the identifying signature elements of that whiskey, so that you could really differentiate in a tasting that that's not a Tennessee whiskey, that's not a Kentucky whiskey, that's not an Irish whiskey. Where is that from? And in creating an entirely new category of whiskey that are the Texas whiskeys, I think, Rob, you've done an extraordinary job. This is clearly, I'm going to say this in the nicest way possible, this is not like anything else.
No, and a lot of our Texas whiskeys have a distinctness to them. And I mean, with TX Bourbon specifically, one of the really cool parts about it is just how much we try to tap into local ingredients. And I know it's like a buzzword, but we are the only distillery to utilize a wild strain of Texas yeast. So that was my first job with the company, was to go on a wild yeast hunt and isolate a wild Texas yeast strain. Actually, as part of my interview process, they asked me, "Can I do that?" Because a lot of the guys in Kentucky have proprietary strains that were isolated decades ago, and I didn't know, but I wanted the job, so I told the two original proprietors. I told them, "Sure, I can do that for you," and hire me. And but that's why, it was one of the first things I did, was go on a wild yeast hunt, and we ended up with a yeast strain that came from a pecan nut on a ranch about an hour southwest of our distillery.
Oh, interesting.
And a lot of those distinct cinnamon and dark fruit flavors you get in the bourbon are from the wild yeast. And we know because we've done batches with commercial whiskey yeast for comparison, and those distinct notes aren't there. And then we also have one farmer that supplies us all of our grain. John Sawyer, he's about an hour south of us. And he, since 2015, has supplied us all of our yellow dent corn, all of our soft red winter wheat. And then he really pioneered the growing of rye and barley in Texas. And over the past couple of years, became our sole supplier of both rye and barley.
Wow, that is so cool.
So just
Hey, Rob.
all those things come together, and it's a distinct product. You know, you layer flavor. The grain is the base, and then the yeast will introduce. You know, from grain you can get a lot of cereal notes, yeah, but you can get some nice fruit notes as well. The yeast is going to make a ton of esters that are real fruity, floral notes, and then maturation layers on the vanilla and caramel and all those.
Have you heard of that?
Nuts.
Hey, Rob, have you heard of that red corn? That red corn? It's like a red corn.
Yeah, Bloody Butcher, Jimmy Red.
Yeah. Jimmy Red, yeah.
Yeah, that's another cool thing that's going on is, I guess you could look at basically distillers, especially the craft distillers, the new guys are starting to look at grains the same way that winemakers look at grapes. And instead of just saying, let me go buy yellow dent corn off the commodity market, I'm not saying it's bad corn or that doesn't make good whiskey. It does make great whiskey. But are we missing something when you look at how many varieties of our heirloom grains have existed in the past? And the flavors are very, there's a ton of diversity of flavor in our heirloom grains that just aren't present in our modern varieties. And I think there's a huge,
and that's why
discover a lot with that.
And that's why this whiskey doesn't taste like anything any of our forefathers would have ever sipped. And if they had a sip of this, they would have just loved it, and it would have developed its own tradition, its own legend.
Yeah.
Rob, are you going to be working on any rye whiskeys?
We've got a rye whiskey that we've been working on for years. The first release will come out here in a few months, and then eventually we'll have it'll be a permanent product that we have in the market.
You know what would be fun to see on a bottle one day, Jennifer?
What?
Heirloom grains. No one's written it. It's not on any bottle, right? How cool.
You know what? I believe Miss Troy Ball at Troy & Sons Whiskey in Carolina, makers of the Carolina Blonde Whiskey, might actually have that word on there, but you could correct me if I'm mistaken. Before we let everybody go on to the next topic, the one thing I want to talk about this bourbon is
I was on a topic.
It's screaming. It is absolutely screaming for grilling. If it's possible for a food category to be as broad as grilled food, to be conjured up and really craved with something that's as simple as a whiskey sip. And again, Dale DeGroff, the king of cocktails, said that cocktails are 15 perfect sips meant to stimulate the appetite. This is a whiskey, a cocktail unto itself, stimulating the appetite, igniting the craving for grilling. And with that, we're going to turn to Matt more.
Well, can I to say something? Can I alliterate a little bit? I mean, you're like the alliteration queen. So we're talking about the heirlooms, and Matt, I want to know, how long did it take you to really, really find all the best busts of the South? I mean, this is amazing, right? I want to know what kind of research you did. Were there heirloom butts? What's going on, right? It's perfection. I don't know what's going on, Jennifer, but I saw this and I said, what kind of show are you running here, Jen?
Well,
what kind of show?
We actually went to Matt's book and we did a rib recipe that,
look at this.
Yes, from Serial Griller. And the Serial Griller recipe you'll see pictures of in our next segment with Rob Arnold, because we did a rib recipe out of his book.
Look at this. The Southern Gentleman's Kitchen. I mean, look at this. First of all, that's what he calls himself. I don't know. Is this a Southern gentleman? Is this what a Southern gentleman
Well, it started. That was obviously the first book was Have a River for Dinner, which I published in, I think, 2010. And that was before I met my wife and led to me, obviously, becoming a Southern gentleman of many ways. And we wrote Southern Gentleman's Kitchen. And then I say it kind of all went to heck because we did the South's Best Butts, and now we're doing serial griller, and there's other ideas that are out there.
That's
but
amazing.
yeah,
I mean, dude, if you were opening for Vassar 15 years ago, that's when that was 20, 30,000. Those were big stadiums he was doing 15 years ago.
Yeah, these weren't honky tonks.
Well,
No, they were not.
I wasn't on that tour, but we had a good time.
Woo. All right, let's talk about grilling. Should we go say goodbye to Rob, or does Rob want to stick around?
Rob, you want to stick around?
Yeah, sure.
What would he say, no, Jennifer? He has Michael Politz time. Rob, you're getting Michael Politz time. Nobody gets Michael Politz time, bro.
Yeah,
so take it. Right? Take it.
All I can get, yeah.
All right, maybe Rob and I'll go backstage and drink some whiskey while you and Matt talk. What do you think of that, Jen?
No, I want Rob to get to know Matt. I mean, there's a reason we curate these shows like dinner parties. We select our guests so carefully, and we blend our personalities and philosophies such that we know that we're introducing people who could become friends for life.
Wow. And I want to say that every time, an hour after the show, Jennifer always calls me and says one of her girlfriends called her up and said that I'm a misogynistic pig. And how dare you be on a show with him? He makes you look bad. Get rid of that guy. He's horrible. On and on and on. I'm going to admit that, Jen, right now. I don't want to hear that today.
Okay.
But it's okay. We were watching Moana this morning, and Maui was doing his song about like how he's the greatest and la 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 la. And I said to my wife, I love that song. She said, of course you do. He's a narcissist. So that's what I live with, you guys. Okay, good.
Can I talk about serial grillers? Because the idea that we get to talk to a gentleman who has in the shot his incredible cooking modality, that he is willing to share with us tips on how you can grill, even if you don't have a sprawling southern estate, a back 40. If all you have is room for a hibachi, he's got things that he knows how to coax out of not only the space, but the small amount of flame that we need to do the grilling that we need to do to really make our food incredible. Matt, help us.
Jennifer, you are a true wordsmith. Thank you.
Grilling is an art. Like whiskey making, it is a blend of art and science. Take us through with the summer that lies ahead, where we may be cooking and grilling for ourselves or for many, whether we have open houses or more quarantine. You've got tips on how to grill during quarantine that we want to start off with, and hope that by the end of the summer season, we can do lots more.
Yeah, I mean, Serial Griller is a follow-up to the South's Best Butts, which was this grand homage to Southern barbecue and traveling all throughout the barbecue belt and meeting pit masters and getting their stories. And, one of the unique things as being born and raised in the South is there's a drastic difference between what is barbecue and what is grilling. And I still don't think that's appreciated across the country. So they're very disparate subjects. With barbecue, there's a lot of secrecy. There's a lot of, uniqueness. There's a lot of regionality. So, North Carolina style barbecue, depending on if you're in Eastern or Western North Carolina, is going to vary quite differently from Oklahoma and Texas and everywhere in between. So there's a lot of independence that I think is really well fostered. And what we wanted to do with Serial Griller is actually kind of go on that same road trip. My photographer, Andrea Behrens, who's based here in Nashville, she's really an indie rock kind of style photographer that I think is the absolute best in the world, that kind of shoots these kind of Terry Richardson style documentarian shots of us traveling on the road and meeting different grill masters. And for me, with Serial Griller, we wanted to make sure that we captured everything good that happens above 300 degrees. Essentially, basically, every recipe really creates the Maillard reaction, which is, just the chemical science of what occurs. And I know Rob could probably speak to this because it's also involved in like brewing and those types of things of, high heat temperatures, what happens with the natural enzymes and sugars, so on and so forth. But I will share this. The coolest thing about Serial Griller is we traveled a lot outside the South and everywhere in between. And one of the great things that we found is it doesn't matter your race, your gender, your religion, who you are, where you come from. cultures and cuisines essentially all share one commonality, and that's the fact that we can all make our food better over a grill. And
Cooking
so
on
I
fire.
really, what's that?
Cooking on fire.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of represent, America has always been a melting pot, and we're really unique to live in a culture where everybody has really come from somewhere else, but we hold pretty hard and fast to our food traditions. My family is of Lebanese descent. My grandfather was a butcher,
yeah.
and we always remember, as I mentioned, growing up in the South, my grandmother would fry chicken in cast iron, and we were eating tabbouleh and kibbeh naya before it became cool. But I just remember him coming home with cuts that now are called like flat iron and other different terms that back in the day they didn't even have a name. But he knew how to butcher them, and we cook them over charcoal. And
the toom? Did you use the toom, the garlic sauce?
With double the garlic, of course. Oh, yeah. So
let me tell you, America. I'm just going to say this, Matt. America doesn't know what they're missing, right? Like this is the greatest. I use it as a condiment. Like I go to a Lebanese restaurant and I just get a big, like literally a quart of it, and I'm like, they're like, what do you need so much for? Everything. It is and then there's a fantastic gyro place. I know Cairo, however you pronounce it, in Laguna Beach, California, and we go there, and they slather it on. Then they put the gyro on, right? And nobody knows why their gyros are so delicious. Boom, it's But so his background, Jennifer, lends itself to amazing. Yeah.
Let's just go on a tangent and take us off track. There's a place called Falafel City in downtown Calgary in Alberta, Canada, of all places. And they do something I haven't seen done anywhere else in the world. They take an enormous round flatbread and they build the gyro with gobs of the garlic and the Lebanese pickles, the purple pickles.
Sure. Yeah.
And then they roll the whole thing up in this one. It's like because it's cold, they wrap it up in a comforter, and then they put the whole thing in a press.
Yes. I'm telling you, that's what they do in Laguna Beach. Same thing. They put it in a press.
It's amazing.
But it breaks up that garlic right in. Oh, you were going back to Matt? I'm sorry. I was talking about me right now.
I thought we were here to talk about Lebanese food.
We are.
I'm ready, dude. I'm coming to Nashville if you're cooking Lebanese food.
I am all the time.
100% favorite. 100%.
I almost wish that he had spelt cereal grillers with SEAR, eel. Because the great thing about grilling and the way to really think about it, Matt, you did us a big favor in explaining this, is you want to be so high heat you can get searing happening, which gives an entirely different process, which you're giving us the proper name for.
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time in the book talking about not only the Maillard reaction, but a couple interesting stats that I came across. Believe it or not, I do some research in addition to flying around the country and eating great food. But 75% of Americans own a grill, which I think is just a fantastic stat. Think about that. Like 3/4 of all Americans. So what are we at? Like 300 million people in the United States own a grill. And one of the other unique sides of that is that 62, if you talk to my friend Meathead out of Chicago, he's going to tell you 64. He's probably right on it. I just like to say 62. I like to make him right as much as possible. Own a gas grill, right? And one of the things that I wanted to do in Serial Griller is not be too much of a snob when it comes to the idea of grilling. I'm not formally trained other than my mother kind of teaching me my way around the kitchen in the same way my father taught me how to throw a circle change up and make a tackle when it came to playing linebacker in football. My mom taught me how to do my dishes, keep a clean kitchen, have a nice mise en place, and make the best fried chicken in the world. At the same time, I think when you're talking about grilling setups, a lot of people think about gas grilling because it creates this level of convenience. But I can
and control. People will argue convenience and control.
Yeah, of course, control as well, because you're able to, just like on a stovetop, be able to dictate a temperature. If you want to go from low to high, it's a quick change. Right. So we spend a lot of time in the book talking about not only the Maillard reaction of creating the sear, but really what is your grilling goal? And for me as a food writer, I've always wanted to try to invite as many people to the party as possible. It's kind of like being raised Catholic on a Sunday. Back in our family, we would have, like I said, the kibbeh naya the grape leaves, the fried chicken, and all these Lebanese dishes. You would have the pastor, you would have friends, strangers, neighbors, everybody in between. And when I write recipes, I want to make sure that if you have a gas grill, if you have a charcoal grill, if you have a pellet grill, if you've got a cast iron egg that weighs 750 pounds, I want to make it super accessible to everybody because, we've seen it through COVID. The more people that we can invite to our family table and the more people that we can expose to the great restaurateurs and chefs that we travel in this book, cooking and sharing great food is what makes us all better. And I think that's really the mission of everything that I do with every recipe and every book that I put out.
Michael's going to jump on this and tease me, but one of my all-time favorite words in our business, guys, is conviviality.
Sure.
Whiskey is a social lubricant that really cultivates and fosters conviviality. So is great.
Honestly, did you need to say lubricant? I was good with conviviality, and then you throw lubricant in there. Go ahead. Keep going. Keep it going. Back on track. There's the conviviality. Go ahead.
I want to talk about the fact that 100% of Americans have access to grilling because grilling is as simple as striking a match in a controlled environment. Some of the greatest meals that I've enjoyed in my career and my lifetime have come from the most improbable places, including hanging out with a group of chefs after hours, after one of those big events that we all do, where you are at a table and you've got 1,000 or 2,000 guests and you give them little samples of something in a tiny cup and they've blown away because it's really delicious. And you get done because you spent 2 days getting ready and you spent a whole day serving and breaking down and cleaning up. And when you get back together, back at the hotel or back wherever you're staying, and you're all a little bit hungry because you haven't had time to eat.
No.
What do you want? And you look around and what have you got? And you get everything out of your fridges and you look and you go, oh, I've got a couple of steaks. And the next thing you know, you're taking found cinder blocks, any kind of wood you can find, and creating some kind of a structure with any kind of found thing and finding a way to build a fire, control it safely, and tie these pieces of meat off of a discarded piece of metal racking that allows you to let the meat cook in the fire and the fire be built and stoked by the drips off those pieces. I was in Mexico last year in Sonora in a beautiful park called I'll get to it. I'm digressing. But Chef Chris Bianca, who's a pizza master of the wood and fired pizza experience, built a fire and he cooked all kinds of meat at Parque La Ruena on these devices. Let's talk about the fact that everyone can have a grill and grilling experience, even if they don't have a $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 grilling apparatus.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, a gas grill is what 62% of Americans have. Charcoal, as we evolve into that, there's more expensive grill setups. But, honestly, there are days, even where I'm here in Nashville and it might be raining or something along those lines. And for the folks that are like in New York, one of my best friends is a very successful restaurateur in New York. I don't think he's ever cooked a meal in his entire life. I sent him a cast iron skillet as we went into the COVID period. He's a big steak eater. And I said, Brian, just put this thing on your stovetop, let it come to a temperature. He likes a big, thick cut ribeye. So I said, just, open up the windows or start your little fan if you have one. And just grill that over cast iron, get a really nice sear, let that Maillard reaction occur, brown it all on all sides. And because you wanted a rare to a medium rare, finish it off in a hot oven. And he called me and he said, man, it tastes like summer. And I thought that was such a cool thing. He cooked it inside in his Manhattan apartment, if you will, using cast iron. He said, I don't know how to clean this pan now. That was the second part of advice. But I think it doesn't matter if you're using gas, charcoal. We've got infrared technology. We have cast iron. Like, there is something to that art of high heat, getting that sear, getting that smoke and that char that really is just super primal, that kind of brings all of us together. And in the olfactory sense, the taste like summer was that smoke and the char and the flavor and the bite. And it was just a good escape for him in that moment where so many folks are struggling right now.
Matt,
Matt, I'm sorry. Can I go? Can I go?
Sure,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, I know. I'm just
Don't talk about Kentucky though.
No, I don't. I'll talk to you about that later. I just got delivered to me 2 weeks ago a Brava. Are you familiar with these Brava machines?
Brava.
BRAVA. And it literally is like infrared light, right? And I put the steak in there, and I'm like, it just doesn't matter how you season it, whatever, right? But it sears the bottom. It sears, it tells you guys. And honestly, it's no mess, very easy. But you can also cook like asparagus, Jennifer.
Sure.
With the vegetable, and you can you can put the steaks on, and then you go a little deeper, and you put the asparagus on. You tell it. And it cooks everything at once. You pull it out, you've got this amazing steak. And so it can be done, right? And it's like, I know what you're talking about with these snobs. Like, I've got buddies that'll spend 3 days, I need the right bark on my brisket. You know what I mean? And I'm like, dude, I just got like a well-built, whatever, I think it's called a well-built smoker, and it's fine. No, I don't need to wrap it in towels and stick it in the cooler. And, right? Yeah. And it all tastes great. It's like, what is this? This is amazing.
Well, I think like you said, it doesn't matter the expense of your equipment, right? It's just I'll never forget. There's a pitmaster out of St. Louis that runs, goodness gracious, Pappy's, and I'm dropping his name because that was 2 books ago. But he told me the best language I've ever heard. He said, in barbecue, all that matters, you can have a $3,000 egg that weighs 750 pounds, or you can have a $40 grill that you buy at a supermarket. But time and temperature will equal results. So as long as you can control the time over temperature, and grilling, obviously, we're looking at a shorter time with a hotter temperature. And with barbecue, we're looking at a much longer time with a lower temperature. But if you can control those, you're going to get the same result. So the person that tells you that they spent $5,000 on a piece of equipment that cooks a brisket, like you said, you could wrap it in towels, do whatever you want. As long as you're controlling the time and the temperature, you're going to get a great result. And I think that's a lot of fun. And that's what creates that whole romance of cooking. I love dishes that I can pull off on the cheapest things possible.
It's the same.
But that's the magic.
Yeah.
Well, we knew that, Rob. Rob, we knew you were going to agree with that. We knew that you're from Texas.
No, but we have a lot of overlap with the malting process, especially when a grain, like a raw cereal grain, is malted. It's the temperature and the time that it's applied to that high heat during the killing phase is where you get all these different range of malts, like crystal malt, Munich malt, and it's due to the Maillard reaction, caramelizations, a lot of the same things you're talking about when you grill. Even when we're mashing grain, certain compounds that come from some of those downstream Maillard reaction products are super important in the whiskey.
So guys, I've got both of you here. Is that why whiskey and a great grilled steak with a sear and a crust and the fat crisped up goes so perfectly well together?
I'll just take the lead. There's one simple statement in cooking, and that is brown food is good food, right? So, in grilling and in, even roasting or broiling, the idea is that you're trying to create that reaction and you want every opportunity versus a steaming or a poaching or something along those lines. And, as I said earlier, like one of my first things of investigating that was like the malt or the roasting of hops or something along those lines. Rob, you'd be able to speak much more on a beverage standpoint, but we love toast because you get that reaction that occurs, and brown food is good food. That's about as far as my science goes.
Brown food is good food. Get out of here. That's why we like bacon.
But we crave all those flavors, right? I mean, back a long time ago, it signaled to us that there were sugars and amino acids present in that food or beverage. I mean, that you're hardwired to like those. Hell, I mean, some of them are. I think in other animals, a lot of the Maillard reaction compounds are actually kind of toxic, but humans have developed an ability to handle it. It's almost like cooking. Food is something that is just so tied to who we are.
Right.
Rob,
And like,
Rob, I want to bring up the fact that the greatest whiskeys in the world have one thing in common, which is a barrel that has a char that's going to give it some color. I mean, I don't want to say that every great whiskey, especially Texas whiskeys, are grilled whiskeys, but there is a relationship between grilling and great whiskeys.
Yeah, I mean, we almost all of us around the world, we work with white oak. Here in the U.S., usually it's American white oak, but the charring process, which is the barrel literally catches on fire. And by law, to make bourbon, you have to use a new charred oak barrel. And because we have to use the barrel only once, that means that most of our used bourbon barrels go overseas to Scotland, Ireland, and to make their whiskeys, to Canada to make Canadian whiskeys. And
So
the point is, charred barrels they are the basis of all of our maturation, whether it's a new chard or a used chard. And that high heat, the barrel catching on fire for 20 to 45 seconds, how long the barrel's on fire determines the degree of char, which determines the flavors you get in the whiskey.
Right.
It's not my art, it's caramelization. It's high heat, but it turns things like lignin and wood, which obviously has no taste, into vanilla flavors, and you get these, you just get all the delicious, the caramelization, the high heat breaks down that wood into a lot of the same flavors probably you get that come off, I don't know, you might, looks like during grilling, the flavors that come from the wood actually, will they bump up into the food? I mean, I'm sure it's all of the same stuff.
I had my own mired reaction. I was plugging in my laptop there, so.
Rob, I want to just point something out. When you're making that last point, one of the things that's incredibly important about the bourbon versus the blended whiskey is that you're getting this sense with the bourbon of a real wood character, and that was a chosen element, the way the artist chooses a color. It's chosen the way the chef brings up and accentuates the flavor. The blending that you do, the distillation that you do, all of that is very, very familiar when we talk about any of these capital F fine arts. Historically, we hadn't considered the culinary arts realm and the hospitality arts realm, distilling, cooking, among these arts, but they're there. Will each of you talk a little bit about your philosophy of the art of what you do?
Rob, you're up first.
Like I said earlier, I mean, to me, science is true, or whiskey making is truly a blend of science and art. It's, you can't have one or the other, in my opinion. You have to have them both. When I was first starting out, I tried, and I came from a science lab. I tried to take a very scientific approach to it, and I missed the forest for the trees. And you have to bring the artistic, the creative side, what you want the whiskey to be. You have to, even if science doesn't explain everything, use it to your advantage, but you use it to identify problems, but don't try to use it to create good whiskey. Science doesn't create good whiskey. The creative, artistic side of this process makes good whiskey. Science allows you to avoid or identify problems and solve them, but you can't go at it with a fully scientific approach or you will fail. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. And it's because it is so much, the same way a chef wouldn't approach, their food that way. I mean, you can't use science to aid the process and to identify, new ways of doing something, new flavors, but it can't be, your guiding principle. You've got to have that creative, artistic approach to really do that.
Well, science.
Jennifer, can I say something, Jennifer?
What?
I'm sorry. Her friends always tell me that Jennifer never lets you talk enough, Michael. So today I'm going. I think that what is neat. Can I say the word neat, Jen, or does that make me look like a boomer? I think that Rob and his background, right, the science background that he has, is very helpful because he is in a field right now where he doesn't want to use that science. He wants to be natural, organic, right, how they're doing it, and creativity, where other guys are coming in just learning about the science of it, which could make it, malt faster or whatever they do. It'll move things quicker. And he's like, that's not going to work, bro. And he already knows all that because that's what his education is in. It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like you, Jennifer, right? Like a woman, a beauty like you. When you walk down the street, people are like, that is a sophisticated woman. Don't you agree, Matthew?
I agree completely. Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Like, for me, writing recipes, the idea is that we were going to write something that's going to make people successful and create this meal that is sort of scientific. Like, if we write the best recipe, we are going to produce a result. And that's why we spent so much time, energy to make sure that everything is super tested and they're almost foolproof. But, I can get recipes from my grandmother that are still written in Arabic, or my mother, and I can follow them to the T, and they taste good. Sometimes they're great, but they're not exceptional. Yeah. And one day I just said, it's just like, it's not the same love, right? And you talk about terroir, like that's such a relevant statement, because in Texas, if I'm in Fort Worth, the wood that I'm using, the way that it's been grown, and the soil and the sand and the temperature and the smoker and the seasoning is going to be vastly different than something that may transpire in Virginia. But that's really the beauty of foods. And I think we can all share this commonality of cooking great food, creating these really fantastic, realistic expectations, but there still is joy and art to the journey. And that's kind of the whole mantra of my food writing and the travels. It is worth traveling to go taste it at the destination, and then you can pick it up and replicate that at home and get that same payoff, which I think is super fantastic.
The last word, we've been wordsmithing all day, but the last word I want each of you to comment on is intention. I hear you talking about the intention of the result that you want to have, that you give to your family. You want to cook with love for them.
Yeah,
Let's talk about how intention is important in interpreting a recipe and making a drink.
I can tell you, I get often asked, like, what was the best bite you had as you traveled 10,000 miles to write a cookbook? And Michael Solomanoff is a good friend of mine at Zahav in Philly, and I think he's created some of the best bites of my life as a James Beard best chef or outstanding chef. But I have to give it up to a guy named Cadillac outside of Atlanta. We flew in and met with him. He had a big old smoker. He's cooking quail. He's cooking all sorts of different dishes, but he was doing a flanken rib, which is really kind of uncommon. And he's a formally trained chef, but he really cooks outside of a nightclub. Politz, you might actually know those kind of places. I don't know, but I don't hang out there, but you might. So
I don't hang out at nightclubs. How dare you, Matthew? Nightclub.
But he did a really a grilled flanken rib. He grilled a jalapeno. He just cut it in half. He left the seeds and the core in, grilled it over high heat, direct heat, allowed that reaction to occur, dipped it in kosher salt to where it just picked it all up. And he said, eat this fatty rib that I've marinated for you. I've cooked it perfectly. It was just like gelatinous and tender. And he said, now chase it with this jalapeno. And I bit it. And I just remember, like, right there at that place in time, that bite was just one of those intentional bites that I will never forget. And it's something I'll be chasing for a while.
Yeah, and intention in whiskey, because our whiskey's aged for years, right? I mean, our bourbon is at least 4 years old. The blend has whiskeys that vary from 4 to 6 years old. No one knows exactly what it's going to taste like after the barrel maturation process. So the best a whiskey distiller can do is use science and experience to kind of decide how to put together a recipe, put together the grain bill, what percentage of corn, wheat, rye, barley, malt, all that. What kind of yeast do you want to use? You can decide if you want a yeast that produces fruity flavors or floral flavors or spicy flavors. What kind of barrel do you want to use? How, different char, like I said, char 3 will produce different flavors than a char 4. Maybe you toast the barrel first and then char it. All these things, it's just about trying to put it together. But in the end, it goes through so many transformations that it is really like a journey for the distiller too. I mean, we do not know what it's going to taste like when it's all said and done, which, like, when I talk about the creative artistic approach to it, I think what I really am getting at with whiskey making is that you just can never assume that you've got it figured out. You've got to always trial new grains, new yeast, new barrel types. because you'll discover things that you never would have expected along the way. And that's how you make great whiskey. Is you never assume you've got the recipe done. You constantly are evolving and deciding, what can I do to try to tap into new flavors, you know?
You guys, thank you so much. I only wish we were in the same place at the same time, and that fire grill was roaring right now, and we were about to pull some kind of big, ribby, beefy, salty, gorgeous thing off so that we could toast together and nibble together and keep this party going. I can't thank each of you enough for setting our summer on a trajectory of delicious.
Hey, thank you guys. It's been a real pleasure, and you're welcome to my house in Nashville anytime.
I'm coming, Matt. I'm coming to your house.
Bring Phil. Bring Phil. He can sing.
I'm gonna bring Phil, and I'm gonna bring my best friend. Just moved out to Leapers Fork, Vince Neal, and he's not going to be having his concerts right now. Like, this Motley Crue is going to, I guess, be postponed or whatever for a couple of months, obviously. So I will be down there, and I'm going to be like, Vince, we're going to go get some good grilled food, and you're going to enjoy it.
So I got to tell you real quick, when we were doing the title for Serial Griller, I was getting a little bit of pushback, and they were like, it's too abrasive. So I pitched them the idea of me sitting in one of those 1980s limos that has the hot tub in the back, right? Yeah. And we could go down the Sunset Strip, and we would just float Weber grills, and we would just call it Grills. You know, I mean, why not,
dude? I have so much to tell you. That's amazing. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do it. Why don't you and Vince do a cookbook and call it Grills? Hey,
I'm all in. Oh
my God, it's amazing. See what happens, Rob?
We can top it.
Dude, oh my God, he's gonna lose his mind. I'm gonna call him in a little while. He's gonna lose his mind over that. That's the greatest thing I've ever heard. That's great.
All right, cheers.
Jennifer wouldn't understand.
Give us a few months to get in that shape for us to take that photo. So.
Oh, it's okay. We'll Photoshop. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Let's wrap up by saying, Rob Arnold, I want to thank you for bringing and introducing us to the Texas whiskey. Not only are you introducing a new product, but you've created an entirely new category, one of the rarest, hardest things to do in the world of spirits. You've done it brilliantly well, and it's partially because your intention was to make something really delicious. You've succeeded and then some. I can't wait we're going to do part 2 of this with the Texas whiskey legend, Linda West Eckhart, pairing food with each of these spirits.
Boring.
And Chef Matt Moore, I love your books. Thank you so much for coming and being with us. You're welcome anytime. And when you and Michael are getting in trouble, I'll stay behind so that I can come and make bail, okay?
We'll leave behind a great trail of fantastic food, okay?
We'll always have $15,000 in our pocket to make the bail. Don't you worry about it, Jennifer.
And listen, Matt, I got to tell you, I can't wait to cook some food over an open fire with you. It's the one thing that's missing from most contemporary kitchens. They're far too sanitized. They need more fire in the great kitchens in America.
Can't agree with you more. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you,
Matt. Stay in touch, buddy. Stay in touch with us.
See you later.
Bye-bye. Wow. What do you think?
You say that every show. Like, you're surprised that we pulled some things together that are really going to delight you.
I mean, Rob was a little nerdy. I'm not gonna lie.
love that.
No, I'm just kidding. I liked Rob. Rob was cool. They're all fun. I'm sure all the girls love Rob because he's a scientist. Oh, God. I don't even want to talk about it.
Listen.
Right? That's what's up. Matt was like, I was a football player and a singer. And Rob's like, I'm a scientist. And the girls were like, ooh, football player, singer, scientist. Ooh. That's what you girls are like. That's what you girls are like.
But you see how they all tie together on multiple levels. How there's fire in Rob's world that charred barrels, that the fire in Matt's world that makes it all become whatever it's going to be.
Jennifer, brilliant. You've done a brilliant show today. A brilliant show. I can't wait for the next one.
Listen, I'm going to put a call out right now to the publicists out there. I want to know what's going on in your worlds during quarantine, the way that Chef Matt is teaching us about grilling in quarantine. I want to hear from you. I want to find the most unbelievably exciting stories that just are not finding their way to the trade for whatever reason, we want to give you a shot because we are on a quest to find the most extraordinary food and beverage stories in America.
Ooh, that makes me feel like I'm doing something good and fancy.
When you get home, hug your kids, count your blessings. We'll see you tomorrow.